The conference finals have been pretty boring so far, pretty straight ahead, a lot of domination between the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat being the surprising team coming out of the play-in to being a game away from winning the Eastern Conference in a sweeping fashion. That's leading folks to ponder the future of one Jaylen Brown up in Boston. Grizzlies fans have long wondered what it might take to get Brown out of a Celtics jersey. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's going to be a pretty terrific Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, in large part because the dynamic duo is back together. And I don't know if you noticed this, Damichael, but we're Team Blue Shirts today.
All right. I already was pulling my shirts up before you started talking. I already knew where you were going. It's just the Blue Shirt Tuesday.
Beale Street Blue Shirt Tuesday here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for checking us out. However you're listening, however you're watching, so much. It's appreciated by Damichael and I, my co-host, Damichael Cole, of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. I also do some work over at SB Nation. We're happy to have you on this Tuesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Again, we are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are so grateful to our everydayers who have helped make us part of the 2,000-plus subscribers club. Continue to hit that subscribe button, rate, review, like, comment, all those fun things, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Damichael, you were not here yesterday, and I have a sneaky suspicion not to put your business in the street. One of the reasons that you weren't here is there was some basketball on that you were interested in. Boston Celtics, Miami Heat, Game 3. And the reason that you've been interested of late, you know, that you mentioned before the show started, your reporter senses over there at Commercial Appeal, they've been tingling for years now, not just months, but years. The availability of Jaylen Brown in a trade has been the subject of rumors, not just in Memphis, but across the National Basketball Association. After the events of Game 3, where you've got Hall of Famers and coaches, even the Celtics coach himself, Joe Mazzulla, coming out saying, yeah, it looks like I've lost the team. That's not good. So is this the closest, in your opinion, that the Boston Celtics have come to actually being willing to trade arguably the best wing that the Memphis Grizzlies could acquire? Better than OG Anunoby. This might be sacrilege, but better than Mikal Bridges. Yeah. Jaylen Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, partner, second team All-NBA this past season. Literally one of the top 10 to 15 players in the entire National Basketball Association. Maybe he's available.
Yeah, and to your question, is this the closest? I think so. This is the closest.
Wow.
This is the most plausible it is felt that the idea of trading Jaylen Brown could happen. So here's the thing. Let's kind of add some context here to the situation with Jaylen Brown. I, for one, people, in Memphis have long been enamored with the idea of acquiring a guy like Jaylen Brown. You know, Joe, you've had this conversation for years now, but I've quite frankly never entertained it because the fact that the Celtics have, for the last 6 to 7 years, have pretty much looked like a force, like a team that is one move away or just one injury or just one lucky bounce away from winning an NBA title. Over the past 6-7 years, they have been firmly in the conversation every single season. So with that being said, going back to Jaylen Brown, the fact that he and Jason Tatum are arguably not only one of the best wing duos in the NBA, but they're both comfortably just now entering their primes pretty much. So it feels like this is one of those things you let ride out for a while, but it feels like the Celtics now the reason I think the tenor is changing, not only among myself, but just people I've talked to a little bit, is this just who they're going to be? And not only is this just who they're going to be, it's more of, is this who they're going to be in terms of how much more they can add to the team? Right now, you got Marcus Smart. You got Malcolm Brogdon on a nice deal. You got Derek White. Like, they got some depth over there. You got Robert Williams on that nice center contract. You got Al Horford over there. You got some pieces over there. But the thing is, the reason this conversation is relevant, Jaylen Brown's next season will be entering the final season of his contract, right? 23-24 will be the last year of his current contract. And not only that, that contract next season has a base salary of around $28.5 million. There is some incentives in there. I think it goes upwards over $30 million, but the base salary is around $28.5 million. But here's the thing, where this is why the trade conversation is happening right now. Jaylen Brown made All-NBA. You remember in Memphis, we were having the conversation about Ja Morant and the money significance there. The significance on the Jaylen Brown end is, since he made All-NBA, he is up for a potential 5-year, $295 million contract extension this summer.
Wow.
That would make him the highest paid player in Boston Celtic history. That would make him the highest paid player in NBA history if he signs that 5-year, $295 million deal. And not only that, Jason Tatum, the following summer, would be up for a similar deal above $300 million.
Wow.
So you're talking about committing $600 million to two players over the next 5 years for the Boston Celtics. That's what they're weighing. And quite frankly, if they were to trade Jaylen Brown, you could get a nice package and you could flip that and still be very competitive building something around Jason Tatum. So that is what they have to weigh here. But it's more about the financial side of it for them. And as we talked about, the Grizzlies are one of the teams who could potentially use a guy like Jaylen Brown, Joe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could certainly use a player who I think among national NBA circles would say at this point, given all that Ja Morant has been through, Jaylen Brown and Ja Morant are on the same tier in terms of type of NBA player, top 10 to 20 NBA player. If that's the tier you want to select, Jaylen Brown and Ja are on the same wavelength. I do wonder, and I know we'll talk about this throughout the show, what the Grizzlies would be willing to give up. And I wonder what Memphis would have to give up in order to make that work for themselves financially, because Ja Morant is entering his max contract, because Jaren Jackson Jr., even though it's a descending contract, it's still $100 million plus contract. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, I know we're going to talk more about this in a moment, you keep Desmond Bane. And if you're able to say, Desmond Bane, you are now the fourth best player on the Memphis Grizzlies, that is an NBA championship winning team, not contending team. Assuming health, a Ja, Bane, Jaylen Brown, Jaren Jackson Jr. core, assuming health, and obviously the off-the-court issues with Ja.
You're teasing the people. You're teasing the people right now.
That is an NBA championship winning core, right? You got to do some tweaking around it. But two questions are going to come out of this, which we'll talk about throughout the show. One, can you get Jaylen Brown without Desmond Bane? And two, if you can, what do you give up and how does that inhibit future business? Because I know that we're going to talk later on in the summer about the new collective bargaining agreement and the new punishments against luxury tax teams. Obviously, Robert Parra being one of the top 12 or so richest sports owners on the planet, at some point you have to take him at his word when he says, I don't care about the luxury tax. We need to see it in Memphis, Tennessee. You live there. You're from there. I lived in Memphis. If you're in the luxury tax in Memphis, it's different than being in the luxury tax in California with Golden State or the Lakers or something like that. It's just not the same market size. So you're eating a lot of money if you're in the luxury tax in Memphis.
And to that point, Boston is one of the bigger markets.
Sure.
Right? So at the end of the day, he might very well just sign that extension in Boston and end up there. And this whole point about him potentially being traded. But if he doesn't sign that extension this summer, it's going to get louder. It's going to get very loud. And you might be saying, okay, other than the contract status, what is leading people to having this conversation? Well, I can list off a slew of things here. One,
not going well in Boston right now.
Yeah, one, just look at the series right now and look at his struggles. Last series, I think he played well. Jason Tatum's had more struggles in their last series against the Sixers. But I remember in that Sixers series, remember when Jason Tatum was taking all the fourth quarter shots and Jaylen Brown was pretty much having a pretty good first three quarters, and a reporter asked him, basically said, why? How come you're only taking 3 shots in the fourth quarter? And he kind of sarcastically says, I guess I have to demand the ball more. Like, that's, hey, look, I've been around a lot of basketball players, and feeling like you have to demand the ball is not something that players the caliber of Jaylen Brown would smile about. So there's that. There's the story, wonderful story by Logan Murdoch earlier this year, if you remember, Joe, from the Ringer, where he wrote about Jaylen Brown. And the big kind of news from that story was the fact that Jaylen Brown was pretty much non-committal when he was asked about, his future in Boston. And that's kind of what led this whole conversation. I think before that, it wasn't really, that big of a deal. So just here's some of the words Jaylen Brown said from that interview with Logan Murdoch. He said, I don't know. As long as I'm needed, it's not up to me. We'll see how they feel about me over time and how I feel about them over time. Hopefully, whatever it is, it makes sense. But I will stay where I'm wanted. I will stay where I'm needed and treated correct. Does he feel like he's wanted? Do he feel like he's needed? Does he feel like he's treated correct? All of those will play into his decision-making, apparently, as you heard from the man himself, as well as the dollars. But guess what? That's that part of it, Joe. As we know, there's a whole nother business side of this that has to play out too.
And it matters a lot how the Grizzlies would get this done, starting with the piece that everybody assumes would have to be connected for a Jaylen Brown trade to actually occur, and that's Desmond Bane. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Big fan of Game Time for all my last moment ticket buying needs. I don't get stressed out of buying tickets anymore because I am using Game Time. Buying tickets for your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. And thankfully, with flash deals, last minute tickets, images of your seat view, so you know exactly what you're getting when you make a purchase, plus the ticket lowest price guaranteed from Game Time, everything is just easier when it comes to last minute ticket deals than it was before. The Game Time guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you are all set. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We're talking Desmond Bane. Is it worth parting with Dez to bring in Jaylen Brown? Next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, also known as co-owner of the Blue Shirt Brigade. I am the other member and leader and owner of the Blue Shirt Brigade here on Locked On Grizzlies. If you're not watching on YouTube, we are both rocking some Beale Street Blue on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. And this episode is dedicated to Jaylen Brown. But Game 4 tonight for the Boston Celtics in Miami. Everything's pointing to a sweep. If that happens, Jaylen Brown figures, as Damichael talked about earlier in the show, to be as available as he's ever been before via trade. Yeah. However, as I alluded to in terms of the new collective bargaining agreement, the luxury tax penalties that could come, there's a lot of reasons beyond just assuming that to get a top 15 to 20 player in the NBA, you're going to have to give up something more than role players. Starting with Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr. in order to get Jaylen Brown feels like a likely starting point. And I don't know how you feel about this, partner. Jaren Jackson Jr. is more of a non-starter than Desmond Bane because Jaren Jackson Jr. is a two-way threat with a higher ceiling because of his physical ability.
We can agree on that, yeah.
So Jaren is number 2 if Ja is number 1, right?
Yeah.
That puts Desmond Bane number 3. And if Desmond Bane is number 3, he would be the guy that theoretically you would offer up to the Celtics in exchange for Jaylen Brown. Now, there are issues with that. Bane is a step down from Jaylen Brown. How do you get Boston to buy into that idea? There obviously would have to be other pieces. Tyus Jones and Steven Adams. We'll talk more about that in our final segment of the show as well. How many first-round picks do you need to pair with that? I wrote over at Bluff City Media that it would be something like Desmond Bane plus 4 first-round picks and salary to make it work in order to bring Jaylen Brown in. Are you willing to do all that for a Ja, Jaylen, Jaren? It'd be nice for, the sake of alliteration. That kind of big 3 as opposed to the big 3 that you currently have with Desmond Bane. Is it worth it to you, to Michael Cole, to send out one of the guys who is viewed as one of the young leaders of the team, somebody who is a self-made man, who personifies a lot of what Memphis represents? He may not have the same level of talent as Jaylen Brown.
Right.
Do you make that deal, including Desmond Bane? Is that something you're willing to say, yes, let's start with a framework of that? Because it's not just basketball reasons that you could argue it makes sense, I guess, but it's also financially, like I talked about earlier, to have Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaylen Brown, and Jaren Jackson Jr. all making 9 figures. To your point earlier about Brown and Tatum, across those 4 guys, you're spending $600 or $700 million.
I think the counter question, and I'm going to answer it, but I think there's another question here that comes with this too. And that question is, how desperate are you to reach the championship level? Because we're talking, a guy who's about to be making close to $300 million potentially when he signs on the dotted line on that extension. Is it worth it paying him 35% of the salary cap potentially, and Ja and Jaren Jackson Jr. taking up a combined around 45%? So that's about 80% of your salary cap right there, potentially, through 3 players.
And for the record, Bane will not be that expensive on his extension.
No. Exactly. Bane, I think I did the numbers. I think Bane, Jaren, and Ja will probably come around somewhere around 2/3 of the Grizzlies. So basically, you're talking about you'd have an extra 15-20 million probably by keeping Bane instead of making this move. But here's the thing. It's how desperate are you to win? Because for me, I want to make this clear because I know some people are going to flip out at the second part of this. But for me, with the first part of this is I wouldn't do it. I trust this core. I trust the Ja, Jaren, Des core and what they're building. Potentially when you get this small forward position solidified, if they hit with the right guy in that small forward spot, I trust that those 3 guys, along with a competent small forward, will be enough to get the Grizzlies over the hump and right into the thick of the championship conversation. But I will say this. A lot of people will be mad if, a Desmond Bane was traded out because, again, the Grizzlies, he is, I've said this probably as much as anyone. He is the leader to me.
Yes.
He has the most leadership qualities of the 3 young guys that we focused on, Ja, Jaren, Des. He is the most natural guy for that role. And it seems like they're planning on him taking over, that role in a way. Zach Kleiman called him the heart and soul, at exit interviews. And we've heard only one player called that over the last 3-4 years, and that's Dillon Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, I'm gonna say this, Joe. If he were to be traded, I don't think it would be a bad deal to get Jaylen Brown, because as long as you keep Luke Kennard, I feel like a Ja, Luke, Jaylen Brown, Jaren Jackson Jr., and if you could hold on to Steven Adams, that starting 5 should be good enough to get the Grizzlies what they want. Now, with that starting 5 comes, again, you're not going to have as deep of a bench. You're not going to be as deep overall. But if you got Ja, You got a knockdown shooter like Luke. You got that shot creator who can do damage in the fourth quarter in Jaylen Brown, and I'm sure Ja will be better in the fourth quarter next season. You got Jaren Jackson Jr., who's still rising as a player, and you got Steven Adams. That starting five is good enough to win a championship in my mind. Now, again, because of the money commitment, I wouldn't do it. But if you're desperate enough and the Grizzlies were to make that move, I wouldn't call it a bad deal by any stretch of the means. Because quite frankly, it ain't my money, and it gets you closer to a championship level. Joe, what do you think?
I think it's important to point out that Jaylen Brown is better than Desmond Bane. And I say that as the president of the Desmond Bane fan club, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's okay to admit when somebody is better than somebody else, and that is the reality. And Desmond Bane, because of his physical limitations, he's even joking about them on Twitter himself. He tweeted out something about
wingspan,
a surgery that makes you taller. And he was like, I need that for my wingspan. He is going to be a Jordan Poole, Tyler Hero, maybe a little bit more. That level of money, that level of player, top 40 to 50 guy in the league. I think that is likely to be his ceiling.
He's a hooper, yeah.
He's a hooper, and I think he's going to be a steady hooper in that way. But Jaylen Brown is an all-NBA talent. And if you bring in, now you got two all-NBA guys. When you have two all-NBA guys, see the Los Angeles Lakers, see the current Boston Celtics, see the Miami Heat, if you include Bam Adebayo in those conversations alongside Jimmy Butler, you're in the conference finals, and that's where the Grizzlies want to be. So I do think that it would be worth listening to, but I would be much more interested to go along with your "it's not my money" philosophy.
Yeah,
I would be much more interested in if they could find a way to keep Bane and bring Jaylen Brown into the fold. Because if you could do that, now you're talking about a super team. Is that possible? Maybe not. But let's dream a little dream here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. I hope you guys have been checking out Prize Picks and their wonderful $1 million daily Superflex promotion during these NBA playoffs approaching the NBA Finals. One Prize Pick user will win a chance of becoming a millionaire. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million, but you got to opt in to be eligible for that daily, or for that $1 million, entry. Remember, Prize Picks is where you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any given entry. You're not competing with individual people. It's just you versus the projections available, and that includes the NBA, Major League Baseball, all the major sports going on right now. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. It's that easy. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Is it feasible for the Memphis Grizzlies to acquire Jaylen Brown without giving up Desmond Bane or Jaren Jackson Jr.? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, your co-host for this Tuesday edition of the podcast, joined by the incomparable, haven't used that word in a couple of days, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am the Grizzlies columnist and current head of Grizzlies content over at bluffcitymedia.co. Make sure you're checking us out over there. Anthony Sane has joined the family in the last couple of days, doing a great job. Bluff City Media continues to grow and grow. Between the Commercial Appeal, Bluff City Media, we got everything you need here at Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, we've been talking about Jaylen Brown, and we've been talking about reality. All right, I want to stress that. In reality, Desmond Bane almost certainly has to be. They're going to ask for Ja Morant, the Boston Celtics, first and foremost.
You think so? I don't think they.
In terms of talent swap, Jaylen Brown for Ja Morant makes the most sense. Then from there, they'll work their way down to Jaren Jackson Jr. and the Grizzlies will be like, maybe no, thank you, and it'll settle on Desmond Bane. I think that the Grizzlies could get Jaylen Brown if they include Desmond Bane, but I don't want to. So I'm going to be selfish on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, since I am one of the co-hosts, and I am going to say nay. I want Jaylen Brown but I want to keep Desmond Bane. Here's what I'm suggesting to Michael Cole. Steven Adams, they could use some help rebounding there in Boston, right?
Yeah.
Tyus Jones, Boston could also use point guard after watching Derek White, Marcus Smart combo type of guards. They could use somebody that can help facilitate offense around Jason Tatum. Whatever prospect they want, Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, Santi Aldama, whoever they want to take them. Whatever matches salary, brother. And then the 2023 first-round pick of the Memphis Grizzlies, the 2025 unprotected, the 2027 unprotected, the 2029 first-round pick of the Memphis Grizzlies unprotected. And then from there, because of the Stepien rule, everything's got to be pick swaps, right? The only exception to that would be 2024, where the Grizzlies could also ship out the Golden State 2024 first and pick swap their own pick in 2024, 2026, and 2028. So do the math. That is 5 first-round picks for the Boston Celtics, plus 3 pick swaps, plus improved depth and meaningful role player areas, plus the prospect of their choosing from the Grizzlies roster, probably Santi Aldama, in exchange for Jaylen Brown. Could that work? Maybe. Should the Grizzlies do it? There's lots of reasons in terms of roster building that it doesn't make a ton of sense. But your core 4 would be pretty darn impressive.
Yeah. What have we talked about before? And we said we're going to form an entire episode around this, so we'll talk more about it. But at the end of the day, cores are what win championships.
Sure.
You go to the three-peat of the 2 3-peats of the Chicago Bulls. I think Dennis Rodman wasn't a part of the first 3-peat, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah. And I think Tony Kukoc came in somewhere in there, but he wasn't on all 6. And the point guard, pieces changed, in between the championships and whatnot. But guess what didn't change? Jordan and Pippen. That ain't changed. And again, you go to the Spurs, 5 championships from 99 to 2014.
Mm-hmm.
You know what didn't change? Pretty much for the most of that is Tim Duncan. And then if you go to 2003 and on, Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker didn't change for the rest of that. So cores are pretty much what wins these things. These depth pieces change. Golden State's, again, the perfect modern example. Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson. Andre Iguodala, if you want to throw him in there. As well. You can throw Iggy in there. So with that being said, those are your 4 guys who have been a part of the championship teams. Everything else, the Leandro Barbosas, the Maurice Spates, the Andrew Bogut's, the Kevin Durant's, Harrison Barnes, everything else around those guys has changed. So I understand that whole just focus on these core guys. Now getting back to the trade proposal that you mapped out here. Obviously,
it's a lot going on there.
It's a lot going on. It's a lot going on. I think you mentioned the young guys. Who would they want? They probably want Santi Aldama because he's more proven. And honestly, if you're the Grizzlies, you would be trading from a position of strength in a way because you'd have Brandon Clark still. You'd have Xavier Tillman.
You'd be set in the front court.
Trading Steven Adams would mean more minutes for Kenneth Lofton Jr., who, let's be honest, right now there are no minutes for him, but this team likes him. So what's the deal? But obviously, at the end of the day, you're going to have to part. I don't like when people say, oh, yeah, let's just throw all the picks out there. Let's trade Zaire Williams and Jake LaRavia. No. If you want to get a Jaylen Brown, you're going to get someone that you really enjoy watching play. You're going to lose someone that you really enjoy watching play for the Memphis Grizzlies. Even in the case if you were to keep a Desmond Bane, Tyus Jones, you mentioned him. What he would bring to the Celtics is something the Celtics have missed the last 2 seasons. If you look at this series against the Miami Heat, if you look at the series last season against the Golden State Warriors, their assist-to-turnover ratio was terrible in both series. A lot of fourth-quarter breakdowns and just a lot of isolation basketball in both series because they can't really generate a lot of good offense because, again, Derek White's a combo guard. He's a 2 but he's in the size of a 1. Same thing with Marcus Smart. He's played point guard, shooting guard. He's played off the ball a lot of his career, and he's playing on the ball with this Celtics team this season. Neither of them are Tyus Jones when it comes to the point guard position. Tyus Jones would bring a different element over there. We talked about the rebounding struggles that the Celtics have had, in the past. Who, quite frankly, wherever he goes, the team is a top rebounding team. That's Steven Adams. So you go back to the OKC teams, you go back to the Pelicans and the Grizzlies. They've all were top rebounding teams with Steven Adams. And then, of course, you add on all the picks and everything. We know Boston, historically, they like their picks because those picks kind of are the reason they got guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in that whole place. I think with that package that you propose, it's possible, but you can't. You're gonna have to gut a lot more, basically. Like I think from that point is those are gonna be your 4 core guys, but you're probably looking at building a team with a lot of smaller contracts after that, because now you're over the. Let's talk about the new CBA. We haven't talked about it much, but we'll just touch on a couple things here. There's going to be the 2 apron rule that's going to be really big in the new CBA. Right now, what you have is the luxury tax. That's what everyone's much familiar with. You have kind of the salary cap line, and then about $60 million or so above that, there's the luxury tax. Once you reach the luxury tax, there's about $6 million above that. You reach the first apron. Then there's a second apron that's above that number. The way the next CBA that starts on July 1st will be set up, once you reach that second apron, you are unable to use the mid-level exception. How is that important? Well, for one, me and Joe are on Locked On Grizzlies right now talking about how that mid-level exception could be very important to the Grizzlies this season. If you look at mid-level exceptions used this past season, I think the Warriors got Dante DiVincenzo over there. The Celtics got Danilo Gallinari. But some other ones that come to mind is when the Suns picked up Jay Crowder. Obviously, was a big piece that helped that team go to the finals. Alex Caruso, I think, is on a mid-level exception contract as well. So basically, not having that piece is big. Also, when you sign guys to these minimum contracts, which they're pretty much going to be depending on, you have no bird rights. Right. So basically, it's the Malik Monk. Malik Monk with the Lakers last season played incredible. But the Lakers had no money, so they had no bird rights, so you couldn't attain him via bird rights, which is basically saying you can go over the salary cap because you have his rights. The Lakers didn't have his rights, so they couldn't go over the salary cap. So that led to a team like the Sacramento Kings, who were able financially to secure Malik Monk. And even so, basically, what that means is there's going to be a lot of roster turnover potentially because you're going to sign guys to minimum contracts. And those guys are going to sign those minimum contracts to kind of prove themselves. And once they prove themselves, skedaddle. So basically, you're depending on that core 4 to basically be a championship contender. I think it's possible. Will the Celtics take it? That's another question.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic they take it. I think that
me either.
And again, that might be a topic for a future show if this becomes more of a realistic possibility, the pros and cons. We talked a little bit about it. I think that the Grizzlies have reached the place where they have their Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, right? Yeah, obviously, they look different, but I think it's Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and they need to rebuild and retool around that. But obviously, it was because of a tweak in the last CBA. The Warriors were able to add Kevin Durant. And when they had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green, they were a juggernaut even more so than they were before. So it's an interesting thing to think about, an interesting thought process and mental exercise, something that I have a feeling we'll revisit on a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us on this Tuesday edition of the podcast. Damichael, on Wednesday, I don't know about you, but looking at Grizzlies Twitter, reading the work of some other Grizzlies writers out there, I feel like everybody's very emotional right now. I feel like it might be time to have a bit of a powwow, a bit of a seance, talking through our Grizzlies emotions. It seems like it's getting a little bleak out there, and maybe we need to reevaluate where we are in terms of what we see this Grizzlies team as, because I think there's some folks that are pretty shaken about the future of Memphis Grizzlies basketball.
Yeah, the once so certain, as our guy Zach Kleiman would say, this process isn't linear, and what we had seen through the first 3 seasons of the Taylor Jenkins era is, guess what? It was linear. He went here, they barely missed the playoffs, then they made the playoffs, then they went to the second round against the Golden State Warriors. So people were like, okay, well, what's next? Western Conference Finals, NBA Finals. And then boom, you go from second round and you go to the first round. So this is the first time Memphis has experienced that with this in this realm, with this, core in the Taylor Jenkins era and the Ja Morant era. And you know what? People are emotional, Joe. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think we'll talk through those emotions on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you again for making us part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies experience each and every day. Free and available wherever you get podcasts. Proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. For Damichael Cole, I'm Joe Mullinax. Have a great rest of your day. We'll catch you next time. Stay locked in on Locked On Grizzlies.